consider starting and maintaining an active neighborhood watch group.
Have you seen the fountain at Lake Eola? It's huge! Check out this lady's head. It's huge! Lake Eola swan boats are incredible. They're huge! Did you know there's almost a mile of walkway around Lake Eola? It's huge! Have you seen the feet on this guy? They're huge! Did you know that a swan's bill is larger than a duck's bill? That's huge! Have you seen the trees at Lake Eola? They're huge! Lake Eola bandshell, it's huge!
Visit Lake Eola. It's huge!
Have you seen the head on this guy? It's little. It's not really that big.
I've been waiting for this for weeks. I gotta tell you, I am so ready to do this. I even have the bed ready. What? So when you get home, we can get really dirty.
Gotta go.
Hey, here you go. With all this compost, we're gonna have the best plants in the neighborhood.
And that's why we are looking at innovative approaches and doing what we always do best in Central Florida, which is collaborate and partnership. So Orrin Henry, our Director of Housing and Community Development, is going to lead us through this. Orrin?
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. It's my pleasure to be here today on President's Day and to talk about housing for all. And let me see if I can figure this out. Okay, great. One of the city's top priorities is ensuring anyone who wants to call Orlando home has access to safe, affordable, and high-quality housing. Housing is a complex challenge affecting most cities nationwide because rental rates have increased faster than wages. Central Florida is no exception, as 44% of households are cost burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And in addition, Orlando is one of the fastest growing job markets in the U.S. There are thousands of people moving to Orlando for these jobs, and this further strains our housing resources. Now, in your, you should have received a copy of the Orange County Initiative on a Regional Affordable Housing Initiative. And most of you know Orange County facilitated this beginning several years ago, and they included Osceola County, Seminole County, and the city of Orlando. Myself and numerous staff at the city participated in this process. And the activities within this initiative looked at historical trends as well as interest in new housing forms, improved housing diversity, and enhanced local area resources targeted at housing for all. It's interesting that among the various community partners, there is broad agreement that a single solution targeted to any specific issue or population is no longer likely to be a sufficient strategy to advance a housing agenda, and that many approaches are to be considered. So after you have these to review at your leisure, and it will bring you up to where we are currently in our efforts. So, housing for all. Increasing our inventory of housing will require a multi-pronged approach and collaboration with regional partners, state and federal governments, and the private sector. The city's strategy has been a holistic one. Rehabilitate and preserve existing housing, new multifamily housing developments, both rental and home ownership, new single-family residence, down payment assistance programs, identify new funding sources and partnerships, and amend the city's code to encourage a variety of housing options. And at the bottom of the slide, you notice what we call the missing middle. Developers are building detached single-family homes, few of which are affordable, and developers are building the large apartment complexes. But it's rare to see duplexes, triplexes, bungalows, townhomes, and such, which actually compose a large percentage of the housing that we live in today. And we're just not seeing that being developed. In the last 5 years, the city has committed nearly $30 million to create or preserve housing options for residents at all income levels. Construction or rehabilitation of more than 1,150 multifamily units, construction of 115 new residents, down payment assistance programs that provide up to $100,000 in assistance to help make the houses even more affordable. And we've made strides, but there is more work to be done. And that brings us today to the highlight of the presentation, which is Mark Brewer, who is President and CEO of the Central Florida Foundation, to tell you about a very exciting initiative here for our community. Mark, please.
Thank you, Arne, and good morning, Commissioners and Mayor. It's an honor to be here today to talk to you about a strategy, really two strategies that come together to create a solution. And I have to say that this is more than a year's work that was really a call to action from Commissioner Hill and Mayor Dyer, who said Parramore is a place where there's need for this to happen, but then the rest of the community recognized that this is a regional issue where Parramore is a good starting place. And so because there is some technicality to this, I wanted to be able to brief you as deep as you want to go here, starting with the beginning piece of this strategy, which is based on a regional land trust. Now, you'll read in the paper, and you've heard other people talk about the land trust. This is really the Central Florida Regional Housing Trust. It was established in December. It is an independent 501c3 established with control of the Central Florida Foundation of the board. We control 50% plus one of the board seats. And this entity is meant to be a regional entity beginning in Parramore. And as you can see on the slide in front of you, it's the first step that then leads to a second step, which is the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund, which you've heard more about in the last few days and is probably the more exciting of the two strategies. The first one is necessary in order to do the work. The second one is really the interesting part. So a regional housing trust is really based on a community land trust model. And you should know that this is nothing new. This has been around for a long time. Since the 1970s, we've had big regional land trusts across America. We've never had one here, though. And in fact, CLTs are really meant to balance the needs of individuals who need to access real estate, need to get to land, and communities that want to be able to control real estate so that it stays affordable over a longer period of time. If you realize that all subsidies right now have an exit strategy, whether they're bonds or other kinds of strategies that at some point in time, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, have an exit strategy, land trusts are meant to make affordable housing sustainable over the long haul. There are lots of land trusts in Florida, at least 17 of them, and there are more of them coming up every day. We have a couple here in the region that you might be familiar with, including one in Winter Park. The tradition and heritage of land trusts is that they're very small. Typically, they take small amounts of real estate and they secure it over time. This will be one of 4 large regional American land trusts. There's one in Vermont, there's one coming out of the ground in Denver, and one in Houston. And we've met with all of these folks in order to share best practices and look at how, as this land trust grows, it can be sustainable and work forward through the years. Now, regional housing trust really works in this fashion. We want the residents to have control of the buildings, and we want the community ownership of the land so that there's a 99-year ground lease here. Now, in law, perpetuity is 99 years, but understand that in land trusts, 99 years can be renewed for another 99 years, and so typically we expect that this will go on in perpetuity, and that's the purpose of this. And the idea here is to provide equal protections for both renters and buyers in this environment. So if you think for a minute about a one-time investment that makes a home affordable, and communities do this in subsidies all the time, the first buyer then has an affordable home until he or she sells it, and then the home is no longer affordable. It's at market rate. If it has restrictions on it, it might stay affordable for 10 years or 15 years, and then at some point it goes back to market rate. The concept here is we want the people who buy affordable housing to have it remain affordable in perpetuity, so that when they sell it, they get some equity from it, but they don't push it back to market. And so in this case, the return of being able to do this for a long time or for long periods of time allows families, multiple families, to buy a home over the years and have it be affordable for all of them and not have it go back to market space. Now, this would be true for rental as well. So the idea is that when you're renting these homes, you'd want to make certain that the rental price, which clearly will rise, but it will rise very slowly and at very small levels over the period of time and remain well below the market rate at times. So the first family builds a little wealth when they sell a house. When you're renting, of course, you don't have equity, but when you sell the house, you can pay it forward and help the next family so that they have a little bit of opportunity for an affordable house as well. So the question I think that is on everyone's mind is, how does this benefit people, which you recognize, and then how does it benefit the community, both renters and buyers? And so if you think of it this way, if we can provide a greater likelihood of attaining a sustainable home ownership or an ongoing renter environment, and we can build some wealth among lower income families, and then ensure that the public investments that are made by you and the rest of the public sector stay in this place and don't get swapped out then later as it goes back to market, that would allow us to build stronger and safer neighborhoods, build some prosperity for the people who live in those neighborhoods, and contribute to educational and job growth. If you think of a housing trust as something that deals with homes, think also of a housing trust as a center point to assist in other kinds of amenities that help people become more prosperous, whether that's job training or whether it's health care or whether it's access to better education opportunities. All of these things are centered around homes. So this isn't just the one transaction of getting an affordable home. This is really about people becoming prosperous over time and creating some jobs in communities through the construction and renovation of homes that are in the housing trust. So when I say resident control of buildings, that actually happens in a number of different ways. If it's a single family home that's purchased, clearly there's control. There's a limited equity housing cooperative strategy that's used in some places. This is more of a traditional housing strategy where everybody's an owner in a cooperative. There's a condominium strategy, which I think we're all familiar with, and that may be the best way to really understand a land trust. When you own a condominium, you own the place, but you don't own the real estate or the building that it's in. You pay a small lease for that purpose so that you've got control of that while you're there. And then there's multifamily rental, which is all our hopes and dreams, right? Because we have a need for 45,000 affordable housing units in the metro right now, and to have more multifamily opportunity would be the key to that. So everybody likes examples. I thought I'd provide one for you of a home purchase. So let's assume for a moment that you purchased a home for $120,000, and that home purchased at that price might actually have a market value that's much steeper because the land beneath the home is in the regional housing trust. The dirt is not in the deal, right? So as you make this purchase for $120,000, you would earn equity, and the simplest model for this is about 3% appreciation a year in equity. So after 5 years, you'd have $18,000 of equity accumulated, and then when you sold the house, you would sell it back to the land trust, allowing the land trust to share that equity to make the house affordable for the next person who buys it. And so at the end of the day, this is a way to continue in a chain of activity, housing that stays affordable and stays updated over long terms. Rental is not much different. You'll typically see rental prices substantially lower than market rate, and the idea is to be able to keep that housing or those homes or those apartments in proper shape and keep them livable while allowing people to move in and out of them and have the rent not rise. Now, Mayor mentioned partnerships, and this is a great example of a partnership. There are lots of partners involved in this, with the city being a critical member of this partnership. The Housing Trust is really put together by a group of people who, at the call of lots of folks in government who said, we need some solutions, we need to find a way to do this. We brought together community partners and stakeholders. That includes the renters and buyers of these homes, the Central Florida Regional Housing Action Team, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, our partners at Bright Community Trust in Tampa, St. Petersburg, who are our key operational partners in the land trust, in the housing trust. And then each of the neighborhoods that operate within the Regional Housing Trust will have neighborhood councils, because the concept here is for residents to have control over the real estate and what's done with it. And then for the Regional Housing Trust to respond with resources and strategies in order to get the capital and build the things that are necessary. The principal function of this housing trust is stewardship and the banking of real estate. So while we're starting in Parramore, if you think for a minute about other neighborhoods around Central Florida that have more expensive real estate, there's never a bad time to get that real estate off the market and bank it so that you've got it for development, because the longer you wait, the more it appreciates. The concept here is that there are places in Lake Nona and other parts of the region that have affordable housing problems too. Their housing problems are slightly different, that middle income people can't afford to live there. Police officers, firefighters, working folks who can't afford to live in the neighborhoods in which they work. So the board of the Housing Trust, which is this independent 501c3, and Bright Community Trust, who are our partners in this, have put together the operational piece, management, accounting, real estate, marketing, sales, all the components that are necessary to do this in a public-private partnership. Because the city and the county are participating in this, and we have many private sector partners, all the private sector partners have come to the table to say that they're willing to participate in this in a way to make certain that this land stays affordable forever. So the Housing Trust attaches a fee for land banking properties. When we bank real estate before it's developed, cities can strategically accumulate lots in the trust. That means that for the first time, all of the jurisdictions, the 3 counties and all the cities within those counties, have the ability to have a vehicle that they can put real estate into that can hold it and then develop it as necessary based on their parameters. The city pays the trust to defray the carrying costs of doing this. The trust carries insurance and maintains the land. And then once the land is developed, the trust collects a small ground lease. So typically for a resident, that's $15 to $25 a month, that's the land lease that you would pay. So think condominiums, it's the same kind of strategy here. The trust then earns developer fees when it builds, and that allows it to be sustainable over time. Trust will conduct RFPs, hire contractors, and do that work in a public way that's easy to see. Now, this housing trust, I should say, has been designed with an open architecture strategy. And what that means is we want to be able to work with all the nonprofit housing developers, all the for-profit housing developers, and all the partnerships that have really come about through subsidies you've already led at one time or another. These folks are doing great work, but they also have some real estate they can't afford to develop, and the housing trust would be a way for them to put that land inside the trust and allow them to develop things they can't get done now. So the technical, excuse me, the technical pieces of this are about acquiring and holding, but you might wonder about maintenance. So clearly the housing trust has to maintain land trust banks. And the goal here is to build homes on properties that create affordable housing, which means that in a subsidy environment, you sometimes take what you can get. In a regional housing trust strategy, what we're attempting to do is figure out how do we get real estate where we need it so that we can develop affordable housing as necessary, as opposed to whatever we can get our hands on at a given time. Once a home is built, the homeowner maintains the property. It's theirs. It can be theirs, excuse me, their family's real estate in perpetuity, which means that they can leave it to their next of kin, just as you would do with your home if you wanted to do that. They also have the ability to donate it back to the land trust if they want to at the end of their life. The land trust would take control of it and then resell it, just as it will for everybody else who has a home in the regional housing trust. Now, when homes are rented from the trust, a property management company maintains the property. So if you have ever lived in an apartment or live in one now, it's the same relationship. You pay your rent, people come and take care of the maintenance issues for you, and you have somebody to talk to if you have issues around the real estate or property. And the concept here is to make certain that housing is maintained appropriately and that we have control over making certain that it meets all the requirements of the jurisdiction as well as of the regional housing trust. The housing trust has some design goals, and I just want to share a few of them with you. The focus on the Parramore neighborhoods as a starting place was the perfect place to start because we had the opportunity to identify some real estate that really needed to be acquired and then updated and then kept affordable over a longer period of time. And the rescue of 44 properties was kind of or 44 units, I should say, including 44 pieces of real estate and 83 units, was really the key to what we were trying to do here. The Central Florida Foundation with the community partners, including the city and the county, put this together, and this management alliance with the Bright Community Trust allows us now to have the entity ready to accept the houses that come out of the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund. I'll tell you how that works in just a minute. And by the way, the Florida Housing Coalition is our consultant in this, and they've been on board with us from the beginning, helping us to design both governance and structure and also the budgeting and the operational pieces of this regional housing trust. Now, each of the neighborhoods that the housing trust operates in as it comes up to speed will have regional neighborhood councils of residents in the neighborhood. They'll all be geographically focused, not regionally focused, and they'll be advisory to the Regional Housing Trust Board, which means that they'll be seeking community engagement, both informal and formal. We want people in communities to be able to identify what their needs are. It doesn't work to create a system where you identify a neighborhood and figure out what you think it needs and then go build it. Instead, you want residents to make that decision and then find the right resources and the right strategy, both zoning and otherwise, to get that done. So focusing on community listening and engagement is what the councils will do, and they'll be very adept at having their council members be connected with the larger regional board. This will inform a broad regional resource strategy, which will allow us to bring the right resources at the right time. So if you think about this and the scale for which we're looking, you're going to have finance, development, construction. You've got to have a lot of resources to do this. And that typically isn't best done at the grassroots level, that's best done at a regional level. So this is a regional strategy with local implementation by communities as we put together these neighborhoods in the land trust. Also, as part of the Regional Housing Trust is the Central Florida Regional Housing Action Team. We love public-private partnerships in Central Florida, and this is a great example of one where we've brought together almost 30 leaders in finance, banking, people from neighborhoods, people who are in construction, developers, nonprofit and for-profit, people who are really focused on what do we do about the affordable housing issue. And they've come together to really make up a group that will be focused on figuring out what strategies do we need, where are we going to get capital, how are we going to develop faster, how are we going to scale things. And so we don't have to depend on unit by unit strategies. The idea is to make this broader. And so the issue focus of this group basically is to advocate for policy and public-private partnerships that get this done. The city and the county are both represented on this action team. Advocate for public and private investment. So we're now at a point in time where we're no longer doing step-by-step investment strategies. It's not about getting one tax credit or figuring out how to get a little bit of money out of some bucket in order to go build a couple of houses. Now we want to focus on how do we get scaled capital, how do we get people who have the capability to implement and do these things, and then focus on private market innovation to allow the private sector to figure out how to build affordable housing that doesn't have to be completely subsidized. There are ways to do affordable housing that are private sector based with public assistance, and now what we want to do is see if there's a way for private developers to start building more affordable housing that don't always have to be subsidized. So as we kick this off in Parramore, there is a mission and a vision, and I want to make sure you're clear on exactly what the Housing Trust mission is. I will say to you that each neighborhood may have a different mission because each neighborhood is a bit different in terms of its need and the amenities it needs. But in Parramore, it's really about creating this permanent affordable rental housing and home ownership for low to middle income folks. So there's a kind of a misconception in Central Florida that everybody who has an affordable housing problem fits in one demographic or one income level, and that's just not true. The reality is there's almost nobody in Central Florida that doesn't have an affordable housing problem. So the concept is to make this work for everybody, not to exclude anyone, and most importantly, not to push the most vulnerable people out of neighborhoods while you're busy building things that meet market needs for other people. The vision, I think, is pretty clear. We want to ensure, because we're envisioning that the community and the neighborhoods that preserve Parramore's legacy and its heritage, but at the same time allow it to grow. We envision creation of neighborhood-centric approaches to affordable housing. That's code for we want residents driving this as we move forward. And we envision neighborhoods where residents can live, work, learn, and find fulfilling work opportunities. In a perfect world, and as you look at regional housing trusts around the country, people move out of subsidized housing into market housing when they have the capability to do that. So if all we do is provide you affordable housing that you're going to stay in the rest of your life, that's not going to solve the affordable housing problem. It's a little like a restaurant business model. You have to turn the tables, right? We need people to become more prosperous and be able to move out into market housing. But to do that, there needs to be some assistance, and that's envisioned as part of the vision of the Housing Trust and the strategy it would use inside the neighborhoods. So just for a moment, the footprint, if you will, of the Parramore Regional Housing Trust neighborhood is really the OCPS ACE neighborhood, which includes Holden Heights. And so this is a big enough area where you're including all 6 of the neighborhoods of Parramore, but you're also looking into some county space here as well. And the focus is going to be on this holistic approach that we talked about. Identifying opportunities to rescue housing will be #1 in Parramore, and I'll show you how we're doing that in just a moment. Unlike other places where we might acquire real estate, bank it, and then develop it over time, there are a whole bunch of people in Parramore that literally could be pushed out of their housing quickly because of all the activity that's going on there if we can't find a way to rescue these homes. And we want to identify opportunities for development of multifamily mixed income housing. This is kind of the sweet spot in Parramore moving forward, is to allow the ability for people to live in mixed family housing as opposed to it all being specifically focused for one demographic or one income level or another. And that brings us to the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund, the thing I know you've all heard about, and you've probably heard pieces of it and are trying to figure out how it all fits together. So think of the Housing Trust as the foundation for all of this. The Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund was put together specifically to rescue these 80+ units of housing in Parramore when they went on the auction block, literally, and we recognized that a lot of people who have been living in these homes for a long time would be displaced or could be displaced if we couldn't rescue this housing quickly. And so the Asset Stabilization Fund was really put together with a partnership of 3 nonprofit institutions and the operational partnership of a 4th. So the Central Florida Foundation, which you know who we are, I think, the Florida Community Fund, and the Community Fund of New Jersey. These are CDFIs. Their entire focus of business is to loan money and capture capital in order to make investments to build things. That's what they've done for their entire history in the community. And what we've done is put together a capital partnership where we all put capital into a bucket, and then we went and found the right debt financing in order to make this real estate opportunity work. And then there are some subsidies, which you're going to be considering later today. And in addition to that, some opportunity for philanthropy, which is also a part of this. So this capital stack, if you will, is everything from 3 partners who have put their own capital in to debt financing based on that capital and subsidies, interaction with the city, and some federal subsidies that we'll be applying for as well, and some state subsidies. All of this money comes together into a capital stack to do this project, and it creates this public-private partnership. All of the real estate in the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund will exit to the land trust. That's the bridge that I want you to get your hands around. So the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund is essentially set up to be a 10-year fund to do this work and maintain this real estate for 10 years, with the option of extending to 20 years if it needs to, in essence guaranteeing the affordability of this housing for 20 years if necessary. But when it exits, the real estate will go to the land trust, and its purpose is to guarantee the affordability of this real estate in perpetuity. So at the end of the day, if you think about this pairing, it looks like this. It's kind of a complicated bunch of blocks here. But for those of you who want to see the money and kind of what it looks like, the 3 partners are at the top of this. The senior lenders are in place now. That would be Seaside Bank is the senior lender here. And the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund kind of sits in the middle of all this. You can see the operational components below. The 3 partners will operate this. The property management company on the ground in Parramore will be managed by a Parramore resident. The construction and renovation crews, some of them are Parramore construction folks or people who have history in Parramore. So the concept here is to keep as much of this as local as we possibly can. And while this is kind of a complicated set of blocks, what you can see is it fits together quite nicely, and it's what allowed us to literally race in and rescue this real estate. Had we had to go raise $8.5 million or find some way to do some kind of subsidy strategy where the subsidies led and then we went to find some private capital, this never would have been able to be done. So as the land trust, the regional housing trust comes out of the ground, this is in place now. The real estate has now transferred, and now the PASF will accomplish literally 5 important goals over the next 10 to 20 years. Rehabilitate all of these units using healthy home protocols. I think you're familiar with these, but we all have zoning standards and other standards that are important, but healthy homes protocols are actually more difficult than what your requirements are. They require us to make sure that there's not a lead paint problem or an asbestos problem, that there aren't chemicals or other things in the home that would lead people to get sick. This is really about making these homes not just market strategy perfect, but making them healthy for the people who live there. Preserving units for current residents and maintaining affordability, that's the primary goal here. Holding the units as affordable rentals in perpetuity. Now, I want to be clear about this. These homes could sometime later be sold, but we have no intention of selling them because the need right now is not for home ownership, it's for home rentals that are affordable. And so the concept here is for us to find competent ways to get more rental properties in Parramore that are affordable. And then if at a point in the future we have the opportunity to sell them, the most likely buyers for them would be the people who are living in them, who have had an opportunity then to build some equity over time. We want to provide financial literacy and education to help increase the residents' incomes and prepare them for home ownership. So this is an ongoing thing that's being done now in Parramore. It's being done in many neighborhoods. But the concept of gathering amenities, there are 37 nonprofits that provide high-level services in Parramore, but they aren't all coordinated. They all kind of provide services at different levels, and you get to them sometimes by referral, or people can find a nonprofit that can help them. The Housing Trust can help be a catalyst for this and help create strategies that help people get not just the help they need, but some amenities in the form of assistance and perhaps some revenue or perhaps some resources that are necessary for them to move forward. And then the last goal is to transition the homes in the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund to the Central Florida Regional Housing Trust. And that could begin as early as year 6 or 7 and could be continue on as late as year 20, depending on how long the Asset Stabilization Fund stays in place. This guarantees the affordability of these homes in perpetuity from the beginning, but it also, in both of these steps, makes certain that there won't be any chance for them to get back to market, which is the thing we want to most protect against. So I've given you a lot to chew on here. I want to make sure that you're clear on how these two together kind of make this happen. Income-constrained households who would otherwise be renters are able to purchase homes and build equity in a housing trust if we can make this work. The concept here is that we're not going to fix the income-constrained problem, but we can certainly fix the market in which they have access to housing. Affordability is assured by each buyer in the future, making certain that they get a bit of equity. You want to make certain that people have some motivation to take care of homes and stay in them, but you don't want them to take it to market when they leave. The public-private subsidy is protected in leverage forever. This doesn't happen often. Most of the subsidies that you grant ultimately end up back at market rate at some point, and this is a way to keep that from happening. And then the negative impacts of gentrification and displaced people. This is the thing we have to most be careful for here. We're building better neighborhoods for all income levels, and the strategy here is to make sure we don't displace anybody in this process. So I think this is the summary of what we thought about over the last year and a half as we put all this together, rethinking subsidy as part of a capital stack and not being the primary driver of it or the thing that's required. Preserving rental development, which is something that's particularly difficult now, reducing displacement, retaining our workforce, and most of all, increasing scale and impact for affordable housing. If we can build healthy, sustainable neighborhoods with housing at the center of that hub and spoke, and then make sure we also cover the spokes and don't just build the housing, then we'll have success over time. I thank you for the opportunity to present this, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Mark. I think we'll hold the questions to the end of the presentation.
No, but why isn't it on? I'm trying to get it back. Apparently it's me. Nobody else had an issue. We're not finished with our presentation yet. To figure out how to get it. Is it there?
Yeah.
It is there. Okay, I gotcha. Okay, so I wanted to just walk through the specifics of the agreement that is before you today. We are proposing to contribute $750,000 towards the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund, $250,000 from the CRA, which was recommended for approval by the CRA Advisory Board on February 6th, and $500,000 from the Code Enforcement Lien Fund. Again,
it's a new effect, Brooke.
Give up. Like a cruel joke. Okay. And as Mark went through, the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund has already assumed all the leases for these properties. Renovation is expected to begin.
Hold on, Brooke. Your slide's not up there.
It's here. I don't know why it's not up there.
A little technical help? There we go.
Okay.
Well,
good.
It's up on it's on the monitors, but it's not.
not on our
It's
screen.
not ours. You know what?
We've got, if it's up so the
There we
public
go.
can see it, that's,
Yeah.
Okay.
okay.
This quickly then. Renovation work is expected to begin in February or March, and will be complete within 12 months. I think it's important to note that Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund group will work with the tenants to ensure that they remain housed during the renovation. Planned improvements will vary per property, but will possibly include new roofs, upgrades to heating and cooling. A number of these homes actually don't have heating and cooling. New flooring, kitchen and bath renovations, and other energy efficiency enhancements. If residents do need to be relocated, the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund group will ensure that that happens, that they will be placed temporarily in temporary housing. But this type of work, I don't feel comfortable to be done in a short amount of time. So if somebody got displaced, it would only be for a couple of days. Affordability commitments. The agreement that's in front of you today ensures that rent rates will not be increased by more than 2% annually for 10 years for the existing residents. For up to 10 years, half, 42 of the units will be reserved for residents making less than 80% AMI. And at no time will any units be leased to tenants earning more than 120% of the average median income. For the initial 10-year period, the PASF may retain ownership of the properties, or they could offer the properties for sale to the land trust. And for the following 10 years, the properties will have the same affordability requirements as the initial 10-year period. And let me go back to that third bullet point. There is a possibility that a resident that is currently in one of the units becomes ready for home ownership prior to that 10-year period. And so we wanted to make sure that if somebody that's in one of those units is ready for home ownership, that that asset can go ahead and transfer to the land trust for the purpose of that tenant becoming a homeowner. Should the housing trust choose for any reason not to purchase the properties, after the 10 years, the city and the CRA will have the first opportunity to be able to purchase the properties at the appraised fair market value. So essentially the city is in second position, and that was important to us to be able to ensure affordability moving forward in the event that something occurred. And then that's it. Go to questions. So the whole team is here and able and ready to.
Brooke or Mark, could you introduce the rest of the team and partners that are here?
Sure, I'd like to introduce you to Frank Wells from the Bright Community Trust. He's our partner, and he will be the chief of operations for the land trust as it comes out of the ground. And then to his left is Nicole Donnelly. Nicole is the Vice President of Philanthropy at the Central Florida Foundation. And Ignacio is here from the Florida Community Land Trust, or I'm sorry, the Florida Community Loan Fund. Ignacio, who I think you know. Is there anyone else? I think that's all we have for our team in the room here today, Mayor.
Thank you for that presentation. I like when Central Florida, Orlando is able to come up with innovative ways to approach issues that are very difficult to solve. And this doesn't solve every bit of it, but it's certainly a good first step and a model for other places in the country. And I'm very pleased and proud that our community is able to come up with this solution. Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, team. I tell you, Mark and Neil, excuse me, I was here overwhelmed, Mayor, with tears of emotion. For me, the little girl that grew up in Parramore in inadequate conditions when it came to housing. As the city, and I saw Parramore being revitalized, I think about 3 years ago, I met with the mayor and inquired about rent control. And there was nothing we could do legally when it came to rent control. And I thought about the gentrification and displacement of the indigenous people of Parramore and how there was nothing I could do about it. There was nothing that the city could do about private investors constantly going up on these folks' rent. It started about 2 years ago or so, to where those that had $500 rents, they would come up and slap some paint on the walls, and then it would go up to 800. Then we saw 1,000. Then we start seeing some displacement, not by the city, but the very investors that had owned properties there for 40 years, that had gotten rich off of the poor. And now, because of the growth of that community, once again, the people were being preyed on. But by this partnership and by your leadership, Mayor, by trying to help me figure out how can we circumvent true gentrification and put something in place to where Parramore will continue to be a place for all and the residents would not be forgotten. Today marks that day, the beginning of true responsible growth in Parramore by public-private partnerships and by the willing. Because what you've put in place is not just a 10-year, but then therefore another 10 years, but the true word is perpetuity, rental, and home ownership, wealth building. We know families cannot go out and get a mortgage being renters. Going out and get loans on their mortgage or on their land being renters. When we start talking about healthy apartments, because many of those places I do know when this money is so important that we're going to give when it comes to lead paint. Those places are, I'm 25 and holding, but I know many of those buildings have been there almost 50, 60 years. And the same paint been slapped over the wall, has not been peeled off the walls and redone. So you might run into that. You might run into some asbestos. Many of those roofs are roofs that are steel, where the winters are so cold in there, don't have adequate ventilation. I've been talking about that. The heaters in the wall, there's no AC. So children, you know, not because of the city. I want to stress that because many times it has been blamed when we start talking about asthmatic conditions and different breathing issues. It really is because of the poor ventilation of the investors that have not invested in adequate ventilation. So when we start talking about a healthier Parramore, today starts that. And I'm so, so, so thankful to staff, to this partnership. I say to the guys from New Jersey. Agnestio, thank you. And I know, and to our CRA advisory board that I lobbied on last Wednesday, for you all working together to assure that this is a solid, solid win for the people of Parramore. You put the people first on this one. And I do hope and counsel, thank you all. Thank you all. For I know the affordable piece have been a piece where, you know, it's somewhat controversial with the monies that we give out to investors, but this is a great group when you talk about nonprofit to move this community forward and be the pioneers in affordability throughout Central Florida. Legacies. You know, if tomorrow I don't sit in this at this dais again, I can go to my grave knowing I did what was right for the people of Parramore. Thomas, thank you. The CRA, Kevin, and I must mention Byron Brooks, that led this for the city, that's now still working towards affordable housing. So this was a collaborative executive staff effort for the last 3 years. And I know we found the right partners. So congratulations.
Thank you, Commissioner, and congratulations. Commissioner Stewart, then Commissioner Gray, then Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Mayor. And let me say thank you. I appreciate the work that you've done. I'm reminded of an article that written about my father in 1968 about the role he played in terms of trying to analyze Parramore. How could we go to where we wanted to go in Parramore, especially with home ownership and stable rent. So we've tackled this problem for a long, long time. And this is a wonderful creative solution to it. I appreciate that. Appreciate the work that all of you all have done. Okay, so now let me get to the other part of this, okay? So Mark, explain this to me one more time about how this works, all right? So I'm looking at your sheet that has the chart at the end.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to figure out we're bringing investors that are coming in and investing in the property. They're getting a return on investment, I would assume, in some sort, correct? Mm-hmm. It's not just a donation. That limited investment is a long-term investment that they want. That then buys land. Then we then go back and raise money to do the renovations on the land. And then the exchange for that is to maintain some type of housing limitation or increase so that we can keep this going.
Yes, so let me make some adjustments to a few of your points. First of all, yes, there are 3 equity investors, there are 3 nonprofits. So the equity return is relatively small, if anything, and whatever the equity return is goes right back into housing because we're all nonprofits that do housing work. So there are no outside private investors in this circle.
And those are the guys that are putting in $515,000 apiece?
That's correct. That'd be the Central Florida Foundation, the Florida Community Loan Fund, and the New Jersey Capital folks. The New Jersey Capital is the same as the Florida Community Loan Fund, but they're in New Jersey. Right? So the 3 of us are the equity partners with no outsiders. The debt capital, which is what it really takes to do the work here, is being provided by Seaside Bank. And so that money then has to be paid back clearly over time as well. And then below that, there's about $2 million needed in subsidy and or philanthropy. So you're contributing a piece of that if you approve this today. The rest of that will come from philanthropy, and those are mostly corporate investors and others who've committed to throw money into it.
That's primarily, that philanthropy primarily is rehab work. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not acquisition of the land.
Yes, no, that's correct. That's correct. So you don't really think of this as rent control. That's not what it is. It's that the deal is done in a way that that's all that has to happen in order to maintain it, right? In other words, we don't have to have more than a 2% rent increase in order to make it happen. So we've done this using market forces, not using a control structure necessarily. And so over the 10-year period, which is the actual lifespan, expected lifespan of the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund, you've got all this set of capital being invested and paid back over time. Rents are collected, stuff is done. At some point in time, then they are sold to the land trust, the Regional Housing Trust, for which the dirt is then removed. The dirt's not in the deal now, so that's kind of a primary piece. Then it's sold to the Regional Housing Trust, and it goes on at the same rate. So that's the concept. And the Regional Housing Trust is a philanthropy and revenue-driven structure that will develop housing and take development fees from that. It will also have land leases and other revenue streams that will help it maintain over time. And then this one, the larger it gets, the more sustainable it gets. So the concept is a volume trust as opposed to the smaller trusts that may only have a limited number of pieces of real estate they have to steward forever.
Where I'm struggling is how does it get larger? Because I understand that.
Yeah, I got it.
At any given one moment in time, we can put this together.
Yeah.
But if we haven't created a way to have this kind of grow naturally, either through philanthropy or through additional investment, then what we've really done is just affected 83 units, and what we're really looking for is affecting a much larger group. So explain to me how it grows naturally.
Here's how it will likely grow next. The other jurisdictions, Osceola County and Seminole County, both have an interest in looking at the Regional Housing Trust as a strategy point, and other cities around the 3 counties have an interest in it. And so as they come to the table, they'll think about putting real estate into it. The city of Orlando has some real estate they may consider putting into it. As the jurisdictions put real estate into it and it gets developed, they get their need taken care of. There's a development piece, the dirt's now out of the deal. So the initial growth will happen primarily by the jurisdictions using this as a vehicle to get affordable housing developed. Secondarily, the trust is expected to be able to purchase real estate over time. That's mostly a philanthropic strategy, which is underway now to raise the capital necessary to do that, and then to be more selective about it. The third piece of it is land banking, which is also mostly jurisdictional driven. The concept that there's real estate that jurisdictions control that they actually don't want back, but could take if they wanted it. There's an option here for them to take it and put it into the land trust, for which it would could be affordably renovated, and that would be a strategy. So there are a number of strategies. There's also a pure philanthropic strategy I know you're familiar with, in that people can give land to a land trust, right? So you could deed your house to the land trust, and that would be a way that it can acquire. It's a plan to give strategy in which people can put land into it. So this has we've got a 3 to 5 year kind of plan in place now with budgets for what it takes to drive that, and our investment partners are all around that. And so this will grow at the speed of change. I mean, it really depends on how quickly other pieces of real estate become available. And certainly, we are not necessarily done in Parramore. If there's other opportunities in Parramore, we would expand it there. The only reason for the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund is that these pieces of real estate came about at a point in time where the land trust was just coming up and didn't have capital, and we couldn't take the chance that this $8 million worth of real estate would end up in somebody else's hands.
Well, we also have the opportunity of the CRA to be able to invest into this.
That's correct.
Where we don't have the other locations. That's what I'm really kind of trying to get to, is that there are other locations throughout the community that don't have the access to have the CRA to step in and do this, which is important to do, and don't get me wrong.
Yep.
But you've got other areas, especially in my district. How does this land trust mobilize itself in Signal Hill or in other areas of our community that we know that we have an affordable housing issue, and we know that we have depressed housing, and we want to be able to keep people in those locations at the same time?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to let Frank answer that, because he's been on the ground talking to several people around the region about next steps in terms of acquisition of real estate, or what that would look like. Frank?
Sure. If I can give you an example from our home territory, Bright Community Trust was born out of Pinellas County government when the county realized that of the dollars they were putting into affordable housing transactions, they were usually giving the dollars straight to the developer to subsidize some of the units. And then after 10 or 15 or 20 years, the affordability period would expire, and those units reset to market rate, and now the county is scrambling to find a place to put those residents who couldn't afford a market rate rental. When the county went back and looked at systematically how many dollars were they putting in, how many affordable units, what they found was something like 3/4 of the dollars they were putting in were going to replace units expiring out of affordability, not to create new affordable units net. And so the housing trust becomes a strategy for ensuring that the subsidy dollars that do go into transactions last forever, as opposed to lasting 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So we'll be looking for those kinds of opportunities. We're already seeing municipalities around the region stepping forward to say, well, we've got this piece of property, let's start a conversation about, is this 10-acre site over here, or these scattered infill single-family lots, are those a place we could have a conversation about how the housing trust could work with us? So we're early stages of that. Like Mark said, the housing trust just became an official entity in December, so I'm sure we'll come back and report to you more on how this is coming over the next months and years.
That's good, appreciate it. Oren, real quickly, I'm just going through the report. Tell me where, I've been to a couple of housing conferences with y'all and honored to be part of that. Tell me where we are in affordable housing now, because one of the challenges I hear from the new governor is that he wants to make sure that we take the Sadowski Fund and not rob it like they've done for the last decade. So what's the impact of, where are we in terms of units that we need, city and countywide, I guess? And then what's the real impact of having some money come back from the state for us to be able to leverage that to maybe even this process or other process in affordable housing?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. We were very excited to hear the governor's comments that's usually a good start when the governor is behind providing the Sadowski funds. And those of you who are somewhat familiar with Sadowski know that 65% of those funds have to go towards home ownership opportunities. So that might be a real good vehicle for moving forward with the land trust to build new housing on some of the vacant land that we have here in the community. And that's something we're starting to talk about. We have to be careful because, you know, until the budget's approved, we won't know for sure if we get it. But we're certainly starting to look at what would we do, because right now that'd be a 90% increase in funds from what we got this year in Sadowski funds. And as everyone has said, this helps keep this housing affordable in perpetuity. And that's a big improvement over the efforts that we've been doing now, where you help a family out, and then if they live there 20 years, they get the house, and you know, you've put hundreds of thousands of dollars in subsidy, but then that's gone. And this way you can provide the subsidy, and hopefully the units are going to stay affordable. One thing I did want to point out, so basically it helps us further the things that we've been doing in a big way with these additional funds. And also these innovative financing methods are very helpful. One thing I do want to point out, Mark has talked about how they need $2 million to appropriately renovate these units, and Brooke and the CRA have come up with $750,000 of funds on their side. They've also requested around $500,000 from the housing department that we're looking at utilizing either state or federal funds for that point as well, and that's moving along. I don't want you to be surprised if we come in with another agreement in a month or two and you go, well, we already funded that, and it's like, well, not all of it. And then there's still a significant portion that Mark and Frank and the folks are raising from philanthropy. And then I'm hoping the next thing they'll come in and say, hey, we've got another 20 units we can buy, or whatever. And also this district that they talk about, the CRA is just one portion. They have boundaries. So we're looking to help in some of those areas that CRA can't go in, and just to pull in all the resources that we can. Did I answer your question and then some?
No, let me, and Mayor, thank you for your patience. Here's what I'm asking. How many units are we shy in Orlando today? It's 12 to 15,000 minimum.
Oh, that's a start, yeah.
And, okay, and we got to make that up, we're going to have to do something significant. We need the state's help to accomplish that task in Orange and Seminole County. And when you go look at what's happened with respect to what the mayor said, this is a crisis all over our country. It's not a crisis just here. And so as we begin to look at those creative solutions, I think we've got a good vehicle that kind of sets the pace that we're a little bit ahead of everybody else. And so I want to just kind of make sure that we stay ahead.
Well, exactly. And as I was mentioning in my comments, where we have so much job growth here, people are moving here because of the jobs. And then we want them to be able to find a house that they can afford to live in, so that they stay here and our community keeps growing. So that's our challenge, and you know, we're looking at everything that we can to do that. But it's a big challenge, and I know the mayor, as well as all of you, are well aware of what we face. And to me, this is a huge step, and in particular in the Parramore neighborhood, in stabilizing that area, because there's lots of market housing being built. It's just that it's not affordable to everybody.
You know, I love the idea this is an investment.
Yes.
And not a gift is what I love. And I want to make sure that we take the investment and multiply it, because the need is too great out there not to make that go. So thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Gray.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. Mark, I think I have a question for you, maybe Orrin as well. Back to the capital stack where your org chart is, where we're throwing in plus or minus $3.5 million in equity and borrowing $4.5 million. Will the lender have a lien on the land?
No, the lender has a lien on the housing, not on the land.
Okay, who will have a lien on the land?
Nobody at this point in time. The capital stack, the bank clearly wants to have what it wants, but this is a package. It wasn't individually appraised lots. Okay. So in other words, the bank didn't come in and appraise all this housing. They did it as a package.
Let me ask another way. Okay. If I'm a homeowner and I want to get a mortgage on a house, I want to own, I don't want to rent, do I have full rights to the house as well as the land so I can get a conventional mortgage?
Yes, not until it's transferred to the land trust. When it goes to the land trust, then you would have the ability to do that. In this 10-year period, as people present capable of doing that, we would look to exit the home earlier from the from the PASF and put it into the land trust so that could happen.
Okay, so I'm trying to play it out because while it's good, we've been spoiled the last decade that the economy has continued to go up, which is good. But we've also, any of us that have been around for a while, realized that sometimes home values go down.
That's right.
Right? So if they go down, my concern is if I'm a homeowner, we all make this decision, if the value goes down as it did the last economic cycle, 20% plus or minus, is it worth me maintaining my home to protect that mortgage?
Right. I'll let
so help me through the whole, because look, if we're not, then I'm struggling to figure out how people can get conventional mortgages, because it's my field. Housing is great, but certainly I think we'd agree home ownership is better for the community than renting, right? They're both good, but I think home ownership long term is what's really going to help spur Parramore. So help me through that. If I'm a couple that wants to buy my house, have pride in my community, how do I get that financed? And if the market goes south, how do we maintain it if the homeowner doesn't?
So a few points about how that works within a land trust strategy, right? The homeowner, who's now a renter and has probably been a renter for their whole lives, has an opportunity to buy this house for the first time. They're going to get a leasehold mortgage from a bank. We work with about a half dozen bank partners that finance this. It's a lot like getting a regular mortgage, whether to buy a house or a condo or whatever. They're going to then build equity in that home, 3% a year. 3% a year represents about 3/4 of the equity return over the long term, right? We've seen.
Can I interrupt you? And I'm sorry.
Sure.
You're right. I'll give you credit if the market goes up. If the market goes down,
so here's the
how are we going to maintain that without the lender raising their hand saying, look, my collateral is going down in value?
So here's the great thing about buying a land trust home. You're buying it at a price that you can actually afford to pay. People are financing $120,000 for what may be a $180,000 home. That fits in their budget. So they're not taking out a mortgage that's more than they can really afford and then getting in trouble when the market sinks. What we found through the last recession for land trust owned homeownership properties across the country, the default rate was about 1/10 of what it was in the private market.
Okay.
1/10. So our land trust homeowners do much, much better. One, because they're financing something that's actually affordable that fits their household budget, so they're a lot less likely to get in trouble being able to pay the mortgage. And two, because there's that ongoing stewardship relationship. Remember, they send $20 or $25 a month, a very modest ground lease amount. We know if somebody stops sending us their $20 a month, something's going wrong, and we're able to intervene early, because the last thing the bank wants is to take back somebody's home.
Sure.
They'd rather work it out any way they can, and we know how to help them work that out so they can stay in their home.
Okay. In the rental scenario, thank you for that. In the rental scenario, if again the homeowner doesn't do it, the trust steps in to maintain. Again, if the economy's not doing well, tendency is renters, like homeowners, won't maintain. They just don't have the wherewithal to do it. What kind of capital does the trust have to do that, to maintain these?
So the trust maintains access to capital to do exactly this kind of thing, and the ground lease instrument gives us an ongoing relationship that allows us to step in so we can keep an eye on, does the roof need work? We're not going to let this house fall apart, because we recognize that we have a relationship with this house in perpetuity. So we love for one of our renters to stay in the home for 10 years and save up some money and go buy their own first home. That's a terrific outcome. That house is going to come back through the trust to another renter. The same thing applies, comes back through the trust to a homeowner, to a homeowner, to a homeowner. So our maintenance, as well as our maintenance of the buildings, tends to be way above par for landlords, because we know we're going to have a relationship with this house for the rest of the house's life.
Got it. And I guess my last question is, if we're capping rents, we're doing, you avoid the term rent control if you want, but that's what it is, because we're capping it, which is fine. I understand it makes it affordable. Is there more incentive, this is a question, is there more incentive to be a renter because you know what your costs will be, as opposed to a homeowner where you're going to ride the economic wave. There may be benefit, there may be downside. What would you think on that one?
I'd like to say that for families who are able to, who are in a financial position to be homeowners, that's a terrific outcome, because we know that historically there are two ways that households change their outcomes by building wealth. One's to own their own business, and two's to own their own home. Building up that equity in a house really transforms families' outcomes because it gives them some resiliency when the car breaks down, when there's a medical emergency, when you're saving for retirement. Having some equity in your house cushions you from all those potential shocks. So if a family's able to buy a house, that's a fantastic outcome. On the other hand, for a family that's really struggling and just needs a decent place to live, renting may be the best solution if their budget isn't going to be able to sustain being a homeowner. Because the reality is, when you own the house within the land trust, it's your house. You know, if the fridge breaks, you got to buy a new fridge. Right. There's no landlord there to backstop you. So one of the things that we do often is take our homeowners through household finance, home buyer counseling, to make really sure that they're ready to be homeowners, and then to give them maximum chance of succeeding. And that's all the way down to things like, how long is the roof going to last? Better set aside some of the budget for that. How old's your hot water heater? Better set aside some money for that. So we really try to help prepare them way better than probably any of us who got a mortgage were prepared for the first time we owned a home.
Right, and perhaps I misunderstood Mark, but I thought, Mark, you said if I'm a homeowner and I sell and there's equity surplus, I'm going to pay it forward and I'm not going to realize that? Is that, maybe I misunderstood you?
No, go ahead, Frank.
So the value's gone up 20% and I'm deciding I'm going to move to Miami, so I'm going to sell my house.
Yeah, so let me put some concrete numbers with that. If you bought the house at $120,000
right.
and it went up 20% in value, let's say you stayed in it 5 years, you get to capture 3% a year of that appreciation. So you get to keep 15% of that appreciation. That's $18,000. That's your equity appreciation to keep, and when you sell the house, you're probably going to sell it back to the trust. You're going to take the $18,000 and go buy your house in Miami. Good luck to you down there. And then the trust is going to resell that to the next family at that below market price, $138,000.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sheen, and then Commissioner Hill.
Well, thank you, Mayor. And one of the frustrations that I've had seeing what we've done with affordable housing has been this constant, you know, we provide housing and then we lose it. One of the affordable housing programs we did in my district was Hampton Park. And after a time, it went market rate. Something that we did do in Hampton Park, though, that might be a good idea to look at through the land trust, is there was a concern because we had some market rate and some incentivized, that we included the first 5 years of maintenance because some folks were unaccustomed to doing home maintenance and might not have had the money for it. Sure. So that we perhaps include that, because we did it at Hampton Park and it worked great. So that might be something that we look to, because that that helped people get over that, well, what if the people don't maintain their house like I do kind of attitude, because we had that from some of the market rate people. That might kind of help. But this actually provides an opportunity for long-term housing stock, and that's one of the frustrations that I see. We incentivize $150,000, and then an individual realizes that windfall, but then we lose long-term affordability and housing stock. And that's one of my frustrations. I've talked to Orrin about this, I've talked to Commissioner Hill about this, that, you know, we make individuals richer while the community becomes poorer. And that's not the way to build a community. So Commissioner Hill, thank you for your leadership on this, because again, this is so critically important. I mean, I'm so proud to see this. If I could jump up and down right now, I would. I'm that excited about this, because I was a young woman. I left home at 17. I lived in substandard housing. I could hear the cockroaches crawl across my textbooks when I was young. I worked my way through Seminole State College, UCF, and I want others to have that opportunity. I had an opportunity because I bought a house in Deltona at 21. And I had to move out in order to find affordable housing, but then I was able to realize my dream and live in downtown Orlando. And I want others to be able to have that opportunity to have homeownership. I mean, that little one-bedroom house on Minnesota Street, I still walk in every day and I'm in awe of the fact that I actually own this. And I want other people to have that opportunity. Commissioner Hill, I mean, sister, this is amazing. This is just transformative, and I want to thank you for your passion and finding a way to do this for the people of Parramore. And we will be able to expand this throughout the community, but you know, we need to help those most fortunate first. We need to make sure we help those that need, especially as this community and this neighborhood gentrifies. We've been doing some great investments, but that's the problem. As you make investments and as you make neighborhoods more desirable, it prices out the people who live there. And again, thank you for all of you for your investment and your courage, because you know this is new. You all had to find a way to circumvent some of these bad rules that make it impossible for us to provide affordable housing. In addition to raiding the Sadowsky funds, which I think is just dreadful and disgusting and immoral and should not have happened. But thank you for finding a way to do this. And as someone who delivered Meals on Wheels in Parramore for a long time, I know a lot of these properties, and this is going to be transformational for the people that live there. So thank you very much. And Mayor, again, great leadership, great teamwork. Because we do need to help those less fortunate. And Mayor, this has been a passion of yours. You said you want to help the people of Parramore, and providing housing right now at this critical juncture is the best possible thing that we can do. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Hill, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go to Commissioner Ortiz, and then let you close out. Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Oren, I just have a quick question in reference to this funding we're giving away. Instead of the money we're using from the CRA and the $500,000 from code enforcement, how come we're not using housing rehabilitation money?
Oh, they have a proposal into us that we're evaluating. This is a very complicated deal to put together, and you know, we've run the numbers several different ways. We're trying to come up with a way to make this work and to keep it less complicated and to kind of spread it around in our different programs.
Okay. Well, no, I was wondering how come this didn't come first instead of how this money came about first, and especially the code enforcement money, because it's something that we learn something new every day, and this is, we have all these needs in my district, and all of a sudden I see this money coming up. I said, wow, this is awesome, because I guess we can use some of that in our districts there.
Let me just add to Oren's comments. The main reason why we've elected to use or suggesting to use code enforcement, lien funds, as well as CRA dollars. You know, there are a number of lien dollars that have actually come from this area, have come from Parramore, and have gone into that fund from properties that have fallen in disrepair. The bigger reason, though, is that in order to move this project forward expeditiously, we needed to have a way to get funds transferred quickly to enable renovations to proceed. So the structure of this agreement is actually one where the Central Florida Foundation is acting as the city's fiscal agent from the perspective that should this be approved, we will transmit the funds to the foundation. The foundation will hold those funds in a separate account so that the work can start, and as those invoices come in, because they are also choosing to use small locally procured contractors that would not have the ability really to wait 30 days for payment or 60 days for payment. By them acting as fiscal agent and the funds being there, the Central Florida Foundation is responsible for ensuring that the improvements and the renovations have occurred as planned, and then remitting funds from that account to the contractors that have performed that work. And so it's important to us to make sure that those contractors, again, which are small contractors, are able to be sustained through this project as well. A number of the federal housing programs that we participate in are reimbursement type programs where you have to show proof of the work and then get reimbursed, and so this piece was critical, which is why we have proposed to split it between these sources, the lien fund and the CRA fund, and then look to our federal and state funds and bring those agreements forward separately as they choose to apply for those.
I believe this is a great opportunity. I'm just, the reason I'm asking is because I'm looking the possibilities of expanding the program to other districts, as Commissioner Stewart very well mentioned.
Well, and to that point, I would just mention that that's why part of this workshop today was to go over and provide information on the overall land trust, because again, that land trust will be citywide and regional, and so there is an opportunity to look at adding other property to it and doing similar things in other parts of the city.
Since you mentioned the land trust, who is the beneficiary here? Totally. I mean, I know that we have the Parramore Asset Stabilization Fund. Is it the Parramore Stabilization Fund and let me see what the other two are. The Florida Fund and
Florida Community Loan Fund, New Jersey Capital, and the Central Florida Foundation. They're the three equity investors.
Okay.
Right. And so our capital will come back, and if there's any profit there, it'll just be reinvested in housing, because that's what we do with the capital anyway.
Good. So looking forward to see this expanding all over the city.
We are too. I would say to what Commissioner Stewart and Commissioner Sheehan mentioned about those homes that are exiting out of affordability being a big problem. The action team at the Housing Trust is looking now at an inventory of what those properties might look like, because that is a place for acquisition for the trust, right? If we could grab some real estate coming out of 15-year affordability before it goes to market, you could buy that a little bit cheaper because it may need upgrades or repairs, and it would be a way then to rescue it one last time forever. And so that is a strategy we're looking at.
Okay. I'm sorry,
go ahead, Commissioner.
Is Mr. Crum here today?
No, he's not today.
Okay. All right, I just want to thank him.
Okay.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, I'll pass that on to him.
Appreciate it.
And Commissioner, I think we want to continue to emphasize this is not just a City of Orlando issue, it's a regional, estate, and a national issue. So not only will there be properties hopefully from District 2 in the City of Orlando, but other cities, other counties in the entire region as a whole. Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. Colleagues, just for today, let's just celebrate this victory for the people of Parramore that has endured generations of poverty and unbecoming housing. You know, when we think about citywide, and the mayor just stated, we do want to see programs such as this expanded throughout Central Florida, but nationwide. As I visit other cities, you go into which was once low-income communities or black, I'll just call it thing as it is, black communities. We see the revitalization of those communities, and we see they're all gentrified. The city of Orlando is a special city where we have progressive ideas and progressive thoughts, and we collaboratively work with community partners to circumvent some of the things that happen throughout the nation. As Brooke stated, many of these fines and the CRA funds happened and were put in place because of demolition in the 90s and the late 80s and fines that was levied there in Parramore. CRA was created because of the blight in Parramore. Only $250,000 from the CRA is being contributed to these funds. But those fines came off the backs of those residents that were homeowners that was displaced many, many moons ago. So I think there's no better way to what we've taken from the community to pour back as we build a community. I just want to read something as we close, the urgency of now. And give me a moment while I go to my email. And I think all of us received this email, and it happened to be from the investor that the trust purchased these properties from. And if you hadn't purchased these properties, and if we don't act today, this is what would have happened. This is the thoughts of the very investor and the very man that owned the majority of properties in Parramore that, as I stated earlier, have become very rich has been able to send sons and daughters to prestigious colleges, offer fruit pickers, offer migrant workers, offer maids, offer the disabled that still reside in his properties in Parramore, that had leaking faucets, that had mold and mildew, that had rats and roaches in his dwellings, that have cracked sidewalks and leaky roofs. But because of this purchase and because of the investment that the city is going to make with you all, those conditions are going to change. And now they're going to have the opportunity for home ownership. Many of them, commissioners, will never own a home, but they will always be low-income renters. Some don't have college educations. Some are in their 70s that only get $600, $700 a month in disability checks. Can't even afford a decent place to stay, but because of them not rent control, but capping the increase of how this rent can be increased even after the repairs. So I won't mention the name, but we all know who you purchased it from. I will give him that respect. And I am someone that I would say respect him, but don't respect his business practices because of wealth building, right? It's two sides to a person. Decent man, poor business person when it comes to creating wealth off the back of the indigenous people of Parramore, and I take that very personal because I am one of the daughters of Parramore. And I lived and grew up in one of his dwellings and was very embarrassed to bring my friends over. Still might be affected, like many of the children are affected there in Parramore because of these conditions. Low self-esteem and somewhat inner city trauma. Living conditions matter. And so this is what he sent yesterday. Robert Koch, and he bragged about being part of the Affordable Advisory Committee on Mayor Glenda Hood's team. Robert Koch, architect and planner of hundreds and thousands of affordable housing units, said affordable housing and neighborhood revitalization are opposing goals. Imagine that. As evidence of these truths, just look at Parramore and the area conditions after decades old of affordable housing initiatives and subsidies. He owned them. And the thousands currently living permanently in old hotel and motel rooms, not mentioning his properties. I believe enough affordable and subsidized housing is enough. Without changing Parramore conditions and the reputation to the point that people will make unsubsidized investments in business and homes, it will never become the revitalized area that we all want. Who is we? Only parties with their own capital at risk can and will be able to defend, protect, and improve the area. Private unsubsidized capital would not be drawn to this area. With that being said, that sounds as if somebody that has owned those properties for plus 40 years, that has not made improvements, do not want affordable housing or rental properties in Parramore. The Parramore that they want to see after they have gotten rich off the indigenous people that he have rented to, that was low income, now want to push it down and want to sell it to private investors to gentrify Parramore. So, today I celebrate you. I celebrate these partners. Thank you, Mayor, for your leadership, for circumventing, and Council, hopefully we will get your support this afternoon. It's a critical time in the city when it comes to the indigenous people of Parramore, but we know throughout Central Florida when it comes to affordable housing. But the urgency of now is today, especially with what's going on with investors in Parramore. They rather, I can imagine, if they knew it was you that was trying to sustain affordable housing in Parramore, they would have signed that ink on the line. Because that's not the Parramore that we want, but that's the Parramore of what he wants. And by your purchase, you have saved at least 80 families from being pushed out in Parramore. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We do have one more request. Commissioner Gray?
Yeah, just a quick question. Maybe it's for Orrin or Brooke. I've heard a couple of comments, and I just want to clarify about more needs coming, more dollars. I'm a little nervous. Do we not have, is 8 million plus or minus not the right number? Is it significantly more? Help me with, because I've heard a couple of comments. Well, this is a start, so.
We were just testing you. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You did the math, though. It's good. So the overall project is about an $8 million project, which included the acquisition of the properties. And so the acquisition was over $5 million, and there's a note attached to that, as well as private philanthropy that Mark noted in his presentation. The renovation cost associated with the 83 units, 44 properties, 83 units, is a little over $2 million. And so the city, through this project, is contributing $750 to move that renovation schedule forward expeditiously. But what that means is that there's a balance of dollars that they are raising through private philanthropy, and that they may also seek through our federal and state housing dollars that are here. So not general fund dollars, not CRA dollars, but our housing fund dollars that we get through formula-based assignments and other things. So we have identified approximately $500,000 worth of that $2 million renovation cost that may make sense for them to make application, and that's important, make application, because there is a very specific application process for those federal dollars that in those projects come before you through home dollars and SHIP dollars and those types of sources. But there's not a guarantee that they would receive those dollars because again, there's an application process and a review process that they have to go through for those. So the team, the agreement that we have in place, the development agreement, in order to further protect the city, even though the renovation cost for all the properties is $2 million, there is a provision within this agreement that requires all of the properties, all 83 units, to be rehabbed to the healthy home standards within 12 months. And so they are certainly motivated to get the other dollars raised and also to potentially make application for those other housing dollars that we get through state and federal sources.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep,
Good?
thank you very much. And Mayor, if I could.
Commissioner Gray.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Just one, while I admire the enthusiasm of the council, I've been an employee downtown for 30 years. I've lived downtown my professional life for 30 years. And nobody wants to see the west side of town revitalized like I do. Because the reality is, whether nobody wants to hear it, even before any of us were sitting here, we've been throwing money on the west side for 30 years, and it hasn't worked. It just hasn't, and that's why we're here today. So I hope, and that's why I'm grilling the folks here to make sure this, in my opinion, has a chance of working, because what we've done heretofore hasn't worked. And I'd also remind everybody, the majority of money that comes from the CRA does not come from the west side. It comes from downtown businesses and property owners. And I think occasionally, I've been one of those, and I've put money in the CRA fund. Occasionally, somebody ought to stop the big landowners downtown and just say thank you. Because had they not been putting the tax money in the CRA, there's no money to go to the west side. And again, nobody wants it to be revitalized more than the business community and every resident of Orlando. But we've tried it unsuccessfully. Let's hope, and thank you, team, for coming up with a strategy that we hope works. But so far they haven't, and we hope this one does. So some think it's critical. I get the rap. That's okay. I'm a big boy. I can take it. But I've been watching for 30 years. What we've tried with our heart in the right place just hasn't worked. So maybe this does, and I hope it does. So thank you. Thanks, Mayor.
Commissioner Hill, we don't need to get into a philosophical debate on the CRA, but I will say, Commissioner, none of us were here when the CRA was created, but without the west side, there would not be a CRA. And the strategy was always we would build up the east side and build up the coffers of the CRA, and we spent a lot of money on the east side before we started spending money on the west side. I can tell you that for sure. So I think the west side has waited its turn for a while. Thank you all. That was fantastic. And it's a great, great start right here today. This will be a very memorable day for our entire community. Thank you. All right, we're going to shift gears. How about we get into some technology? Everybody hold up their phone and see how many apps they have and how much business they do on their phone. Everybody wants to be able to do business with a city using their phone or other device, and we are trying to make it easier for everybody to access city services. And Matt is in charge of updating our website. We've actually graduated to .gov now, which is a very important thing. So Matt is going to help us through our digital experience this morning.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners, for giving us the opportunity to provide this update. I want to start with a little bit about the work that we've been doing as a digital platforms and service design team, along with our digital communications team. I think the biggest thing to remember, even though I'm an IT guy and we're focused on digital and we really want to provide these online services, the reason we are doing all of this and why we are making these improvements and why the mayor and you all have encouraged us to make these improvements is to help build trust in government. We really believe that the interactions that our residents have with us are the number one or one of the top things that determine their perception of the city, right? And whether they trust us, whether they believe in us. And so that is the key point, and we will tell you a little bit shortly about how we're actually trying to measure that. But to start off with is the expectations of our residents. They're changing, right? So today you can go online, you can buy airline tickets, you can do online banking. If you wanted to right now, pull out your phone, you could order toilet paper and probably have it at your doorstep before you got home. That wasn't the case 5-10 years ago. And so the reality is the expectations of what our residents want of us as a city has changed in 5 to 10 years. But cities across the country have not changed the way in which they operate online. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to meet or even exceed those expectations. Deloitte did a study that is now about almost 5 years old, and they were predicting what it's going to look like in 10 years, or halfway through that. And they saw that there was going to be a decrease in in-person and phone interactions with residents and an increase in online. And so again, this isn't us trying to push anything on our residents, this is our residents and what they are demanding of us. I think the website is best described, and this came actually from the mayor of Tacoma, Washington, as a junk drawer. And so city websites often have lots of great information out there, but good luck finding it. Right? Lots of things you can do with the city, but unless you know how the city is organized, it is extremely difficult to find it. And I know for a lot of us, we may know where things exist on cityorlando.net, but a lot of that's because we've learned it, right? We've spent time, or we know how our city functions. To give you an idea, we've identified over 275 different services that the city of Orlando offers that are accessible in some form or fashion online, even if it's just telling you to email us. So you can imagine having 275 things and trying to organize them in a way that residents can understand is not an easy task, especially when our default is by city departments. So up until the change for a Department of Transportation, for example, if you wanted to find bike trails, you had to go look under economic development, right? Most people aren't going to know to look under economic development for bike trails. We want to organize things in a way that makes sense. Oftentimes, if they did find what they were looking for, they are greeted with this, right? Bunch of PDFs. I think we've all been on our phone and pulled up a PDF and tried to zoom in and out and fill it out. And most of the time what we do is we say, we'll get to that later. And the reality is our residents tend to not get to that later, and they don't engage with us or take an opportunity to take advantage of a program they had. This is obviously not from our planning department, but this is exactly what residents think they're going to be greeted with when they walk in here. And one of the things that we found and we know is that we have great customer service when you walk into City Hall and when you meet with the folks here who are city staff. But our residents don't necessarily know that, right? They're expecting government interaction, and they have this perception in their head of what that's going to be. And so they are very fearful to call or to come in person because they think they're going to be greeted with customer service that is inadequate, despite what we know. Or they live across town, right? And they don't want to have to drive in here, or they work 9 to 5, and so calling or coming in person 9 to 5 is not an option. So the solution to that and the process that we're going through right now to really redesign the services at City of Orlando on our website is what we call service design. And I have a story that I share because the term service design is a new one for governments. And that is that I have a friend who was sick and tired of turning on her grandmother's TV to Antiques Roadshow every week. She'd get the phone call, I can't remember how to do it, can you help me out? And so what she did was this, right? She taped up all of the things that grandma did not need to see. She made very clear instructions on what to do and made it very clear on how to actually do the thing that grandma wanted to do. And so we encourage our staff to think about the City of Orlando as this huge universal remote, right? 275 different things you can do with the city. That doesn't include all the things that we want to tell you about, right? But when that resident comes to our website, they're usually looking for one thing, right? And so how do we get them to that one thing in a very clear way as possible? I will tell you some other cities, some of the larger cities that had started this process before us have spent millions of dollars hiring consultants who know this practice of service design. They come in and they redesign these services. You could do the math if you just figured out 276 services and thought of the least amount that a consultant would charge you. It would cost us way too much money to go hire consultants to do this. And so instead, we're flipping that around. What we decided was we're going to teach our staff the practice of service design because they're already the experts on how to provide great service. So if we can just help them take the great customer service they provide in person or on the phone and bring it online, that's a way more efficient and effective way for us to do this than to hire a bunch of consultants. And so we're doing that through the Digital Service Academy. So I'm going to walk you through very quickly what that academy looks like. It's a 3-day workshop that we bring staff through. We've had over 100 staff go through it already. The first day, and probably the most important day, we call empathy. And it's where our staff watch another staff person from a different department try and use their service online. So maybe it's someone who normally is working on potholes will go and try to reserve a city park, right? So they're gonna go to the website, they get no help or assistance from the park staff person who's sitting there watching, and they go through this process to understand what it's like to be a resident, right? And what staff learn very quickly is despite all of the information we put online, people read this much. Right? So we can put all of our rules telling them everything they need to do. The person looking to reserve a park is looking for what? That button that says reserve a park. They've ignored everything else we've tried to tell them. And that goes for all of our services. And so they're able to really understand and map out what that process looks like. So they're using sticky notes to identify what that process is, identify the pain points, and then they're bringing that along with ideas that they've come up with on how to improve it back to the staff and sharing that with the rest of their team. What we end up with on day 2 is actually a process to redesign that content. So the example you see on the left is what it looked like to appeal a parking ticket on cityorlando.net. And I know that is difficult to read, but again, most of our residents are on their mobile phone, and so it's also difficult for them to read when they're looking at it. And you can see the output on the right. And I'll point out something unique about this one. So if you look at the top left on the cityorlando.net, it says, please call us if you have any questions or think you got a ticket in error. Well, we actually asked residents, what do you think that means? And the residents said, oh, they just want us to call so that we won't appeal. Well, what it turned out was appeal is in court. And our staff was saying, if we did something wrong, you've got a ticket in error, just call us, we'll take care of it, right? But most people weren't thinking that was what was going to happen. So instead, we now have a process online where you fill out a little questionnaire to see if you're eligible for an administrative review or staff review of that ticket before you actually appeal, right? Trying to take it and put it in the residents' language, make sure that they understand what the process is. We also identify all of the steps in the process down to the end so that they understand at the end, here's what it'll look like, versus just that initial process of here's what you need to tell us. And so this is that where we went from needing a notary and court fees to actually just an administrative review that someone can fill out online to request that. And the last and final step of the workshop is we usually do it on a Thursday or Friday, and probably the most important is testing with users. So all too often in government, we put together with great ideas and great solutions, we'll put something together and we launch it. But we never step back and ask our residents if they understand it, right? So what we do is we go out to Lake Eola or we go to a different neighborhood and we will actually take our phones and ask someone, hey, I know that you're not looking to reserve a park today, but pretend that you were, go online, and we watch them use it, right? So the staff gets to see that feedback in real time. What didn't they understand? What did they understand? And what are their expectations, right? Are we able to meet the expectations, or we need to change and adjust those in the way that we're wording this? So we're doing all of that, but we're also measuring it, right? Because if we don't have measurement, we can't go back and show that it's working. I will tell you that since we've launched our beta site, we've seen a 65% increase in customer satisfaction for residents using our new site versus our old site. We've also been able to identify shortfalls in services and close the loop. What I mean by that is because we are actually sending surveys out to anyone who's engaging in these 12 services that we're piloting this measurement tool with, we know immediately if there's a problem. So I like to tell the story of the fact that you can request trash bins. And so Mike Carroll's team does a great job. They get a score of a 4.2 out of 5, which is pretty high. And one day it dropped to a 2. And we knew within, I'd say a couple hours that there was an issue. We were able to jump in there and realize that somebody had marked the emails as spam, and so nobody was getting their trash bin delivered that day. Well, we fixed it, we solved it, that team went in there. Well, you can imagine if we weren't measuring that, what would have happened, right? We would have gone for days, maybe weeks, because that one channel may have been down, but the rest of everything else was working. Nobody notices it, and maybe one of you would have gotten an email, right? And then it would have gotten forwarded on, and we would have maybe taken care of that. But this allows us to quickly identify if there's a systematic issue that we need to address. The other nice thing is that what we know is that by making the process to engage with us easier, if the operations are good, people actually are willing to go on social media and talk about how great the city is. These are some examples from potholes. I will tell you, our team did nothing to change the way in which we fix potholes. But you can already see, just by making the process to report a pothole easier, it makes people think the whole process went smoother, right? So if it's really difficult to figure out how to do it, and it happens, you might be okay with that. But when the process to report a pothole is easy and they fix it quickly, people go online and actually talk about how great the city of Orlando is. So jumping back to these surveys, I want to focus on the questions that we're asking, because I think what we're doing here, or we know what we're doing here, is fairly unique for a city. So we are in these surveys, after they engage with a service, asking them 2 key questions. The first is the trust in the city of Orlando, and the second is the overall satisfaction for that service. We're then asking them about key drivers, so friendliness, ease of use, timeliness, and usefulness. And the point there is we want to understand for a given service, A, to make sure that satisfaction correlates to trust, which in all of our services we're measuring it does, right? As satisfaction in our services go up, so does our trust in government. And then we want to understand if satisfaction is low, what are the drivers that are causing it to be low? So this is a quick look at what that question looks like. We literally are asking how much trust do you have in the city of Orlando when it comes to handling local problems, and we can see that trust rise and fall based on the type of interaction they've had with staff. So here's our overall. I want to be very clear, we are measuring 12 services. These are not a representative sample of all of our services. We've got some really difficult ones in there, like reporting potholes and code enforcement and things that are difficult, and some what I'll call easy fun ones, like having the fire department come to an event. So it's across the board, but probably not exactly representative. But already you can see there's a 35% have a lot of trust. I believe Gallup does this annually, and their trust for a lot ends up somewhere in the 20s for local government. So we're really happy that we're exceeding that. And then when you look at customer satisfaction, again, almost half, we got 44% that rate us as excellent. And so we're really, really happy with that. But we obviously want to focus on this 24% and understand why. So I want to give you an example just so you can see how this plays into a specific service. And Parks has been one of our great partners. They've got probably the most services that we're measuring right now, and they've done a lot to increase trust and satisfaction. But this is an example for reserving a park. And so again, most people having a really good experience, but you can see a spike there for 15% of people saying terrible. And normally we'd be caught in a situation where we're reading through a bunch of comments to try and figure out, well, what's the problem here? But by asking about these key drivers, we can actually map them. And I know this is a little hard to see, but if you look at this chart, what we're showing is from left to right, for each of those key drivers is how satisfied are they. So in other words, friendliness, you'll see is 100%, right? So every single person who went through that experience and filled out the survey said our park staff was friendly, right? So they're doing really good there. How high it is in the chart tells you how much it correlates to satisfaction. So in other words, everyone's saying it's friendly, but in this case, it's not impacting the satisfaction. What you can see, though, is timeliness is on the left-hand side, which means it's an area that we're working on, and it does directly relate to satisfaction. And when we dived in a little bit deeper with the park staff, it turned out what was happening was people were requesting to reserve a park online. Our park staff, in providing some excellent customer service, was calling people back. Well, in today's age, if you do something online and somebody calls you back, I don't recognize the number, it goes to voicemail. Right? Then the next day I get that I'm calling back, but it may not be office hours, so I'm leaving a voicemail. Right? And so it was that time difference, that was the timeliness factor. Right? Simple solution there we're working with Parks is we're going to respond via email initially if it's available, give them the instructions they need to move forward. Right? That's something we never would have noticed before because everybody's happy on the phone because we're providing really friendly service. But the expectation from the resident was, no, I just want an email back. You don't need to call me. That doesn't mean we don't want to answer phones or deal with people on the phone, but when somebody starts online, we know they want to finish that service or do as much of it as possible online. So the next steps here, we're going to be actually setting goals with departments to work with them on their customer satisfaction and trust. We'll add specific key drivers beyond those 4 to help measure and continue to add additional services. This all leads us to the new site that we're building out. So hopefully you've had a chance, and most of you have seen orlando.gov. We are really proud of the work that the communications team and our teams have done to make this site, we think, one of the most easy to use sites for city government across the country. We have tested it with users across the board. We purposely go after residents who are not as familiar with how government operates, to make sure that they have access to that. I think we've tested almost in every single district already. We basically give somebody a task and say, imagine if you wanted to report a pothole. Go do that. And we watch to see what they type in. What are they clicking on? What makes sense to them? And so we've organized it in a way that we think makes sense for residents. It also meets our new brand and our brand standards that we've set, so it all fits within our city brand. Here are a couple examples of where we organize things a little bit differently. So for example, while the clerk's office is our kind of, when we think department specific, where records and documents live, as we know, not all records and documents live under the clerk's office, right? So if you're looking for district plans and studies, that lives under planning. If you're looking to find maps, that would have lived under GIS, right? And so instead of having people navigate, there's one spot they can do that from. Same thing with report a problem, right? We don't necessarily have a 311 or 311 call center or department or division, but we've created a space where any resident looking to report an issue to us can go to one spot and hopefully find what they're looking for. It also allows us still, even though services are the primary focus and reason people go to our website, we do want to showcase the work we're doing. So this is an example of what we call an initiative or project page, where we can showcase the work that we're doing. I'll point out to you on the bottom, one of the new features we have, and we're going to be turning on for some of the initiatives that we know will be updated, is a resident can subscribe to get updates about that project or initiative. So if they just want to get updated every time that page has a change, they can subscribe and they'll be notified. We've also created a better way to report issues. So we've made it mobile friendly because, again, more than half of our residents are on their phone. We've made it really streamlined where it looks at the location of where their phone is at. They can take a picture right there with the camera on their phone and report it. So you've probably seen those 311 apps that are out there. We've made it just as easy, but they don't have to download an app, right? They can just go to Google, type in report a pothole, and they're on their way to doing that. We're also providing, working with our Parks Department on a streamlined process for tree permitting that we hope to expand to other areas. So they're able to go online and without ever any paper involved, both on our end or their end, actually get that permit issued to them and pay for it online. Events, still very important for what residents are looking for. Not only are we able to add more events and highlight different events, we're also letting people subscribe to event updates. So if they want to know all the family events happening in a certain area, they can do that and get email updates when new events get posted. Giving people different ways to explore the neighborhood, right? Again, sometimes people like to receive information differently. This is an example of our neighborhood map that lets them see where the parks are at, where events are happening, fire stations, maybe some large projects that we've got happening in their neighborhood. It's one stop for them to be able to find out what's happening in their neighborhood. And last, and certainly not least, is making sure that our website is accessible for all. So this includes two different areas for us as we talk about accessibility. One is on our language translation, and so we are working, as we've always had, to translate all of our pages, at the very least into Spanish, but we're also looking at other languages. But most importantly is the way that we're thinking about that. And again, this is a little bit different for us than I think what other cities are doing. Most cities translate every page into whatever language, usually oftentimes Spanish. But the challenge is you'll go to a page that says, let's say, apply for a business tax receipt. And so it's translated in Spanish, and you click the apply button, but the form's in English. And so that is the case on, I'd say, most city websites. And so we're working with the OLA office, the Office of Communications, to make sure that when we go to that apply button, if that option is not available in English, that it gives them an option in Spanish to connect with someone within city staff who can assist them with that. We think it's really important to not send people to essentially an English dead end where they're, shrug their shoulders and don't know what to do. And so we want to make sure we provide that. The second piece of that is testing for accessibility, for ADA accessibility. And so we're doing lots of testing around that to make sure that our services are offered and they're accessible, and providing alternatives if they're not, right? So giving them the option to reach out to us if need be. So quickly where we're at, March 12th is the date that we will actually be transitioning the homepage of cityoforlando.net. So what that means is if you type in cityoforlando.net, it'll redirect you to orlando.gov. We are not necessarily removing any additional content off of cityoforlando.net, but right now, half of our traffic, almost half of our traffic, goes to orlando.gov anyway. We've been slowly moving pages over, and so when you click around cityoforlando.net, you find yourself in orlando.gov. That accounts for more than half. We've got over 100 services that are there. I told you we've got 150 services that are there. We've got 270 total services. We've obviously tackled the high volume ones, and we'll continue to do that. So on March 12th, if somebody's trying to access something on orlando.gov that hasn't moved, they'll still find the link. It'll just take them back to the old website where they can still get the information, so that way we're not losing anything. We'll also be transitioning over the time to our emails, so your emails will come from, instead of your name at cityoforlando.net, it'll come from your name at orlando.gov. Very important note, you will still be able to receive email at cityoforlando.net, so you don't need to worry about telling everyone to update your email addresses. That will continue to work. So the IT team is working really to make sure that that is a smooth transition, that there's no loss in any sort of communication between staff, between residents, or anyone like that. And we'll continue to transition the content with a goal by the end of the year to have all of the content transitioned over. I do want to take a quick second to thank our team that has worked on this. We've got the digital platforms and service design team. 3 of our members are here. They're a brand new team that we've brought on this past year to help do the service design work that we were talking about. Our digital communications team, who has played an integral role in making sure that the site's brand standards are met, that we're actually communicating the events, all of our initiatives and projects to our residents in a unified way. And probably most importantly, the academy staff. So like I said, we've got 100 staff that have gone through this academy. We think it's not just about the end product of the service that they've created, but actually that culture shift for them to understand what it looks like to deliver positive resident services to our staff. And so we're really excited about the work we're doing. We really see, I think the key piece here is we see residents as partners in this. We're designing with our residents, not just for them. And we're really excited that we're becoming a model for what other cities are looking to do this work. So I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Matt. Questions, comments? Commissioner Stewart, then Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Matt. Let me say thanks to the work you're doing. Part of the impetus of having this was that I saw your presentation at the Florida League of Cities, and the work that you did there I thought was something that this council ought to see a little bit more in detail about the work that you're doing. I think it's innovative. I think the work that we're doing compared to other cities our size especially is innovative, and I appreciate the work of that. You know, I've talked a great deal about trying to get the measurements back. I mean, the role that this council should play is policy and direction, and as every board of commissioners, board of directors ought to do. So as we see the data, tell me how is that data now being processed? How is it being reported back to the director? I mean, I know that the sample data that you have for the parks was only 27 responses. Mm-hmm. So how is that getting, how are we getting that data and getting it back to the department director so that we really can see an impact on how we're changing behavior based upon the data that's coming in?
Sure. So we view the digital platforms and service design team and really the rest of the IT department, we work for the departments, right? Our goal is to help them do their job. And so the first step in that is we have been sending them direct feedback anytime somebody has an issue. So they've all received that. So if somebody said, I had an issue and I want to follow up, they get that immediately. We've also been sitting down with the division managers and the teams responsible for those services and working our way up. That's not to say that Kevin and the department directors aren't aware. They are, but we think it's really important that they see this team as allies to helping them solve these problems and not just somebody that's throwing down, here's your satisfaction, good luck, go fix it, it's not working well, right? So we're really working with them, mapping out their processes so they understand what their processes look like if there are issues in there. So we're working our way up to, we want to get to a point where, each department director has that dashboard that they're able to reference and look at that will tell them the satisfaction for their services. So we've got those preliminarily, and Parks did have only, I think it was 27, and like I said, we're measuring, I think it's 8 services right now, and they range. Some of them only have one person who's given feedback because it's a small service, and some have more. But we are in the very early stages of it, and we're trying to finesse the questions. So the goal of this phase is to make sure we're asking the right questions, because once you change the question, you got to throw out all the old data. So there's actually probably 70 people that have given us feedback on Parks, but this is our 3rd round of questions to make sure that we are asking it the right way. So we partnered with a company out in Utah, and they've got a research person who understands public administration that we've been working with because we're the first city to connect it to trust and measure the satisfaction this way. And so we've been working with her to make sure that we're asking the right question that will be useful for department directors so that we're not handing them information they can't use.
two things that come to mind, but the first is that how is it integrating with the other things we're doing? A good example, and I guess it comes to the second part, is a response back from the people who are making an inquiry. So I see a pothole. The complaints I get are, I complained about a pothole, it's been 3 weeks, what's going on? And I believe that we have a process internally that says, I got a complaint, we're going to respond. So that has to be engaged with the fact that we're now telling the person who complained that we're also engaged in that process, so there's a satisfaction and a trust level there. And then you add to that same issue with code enforcement. And then I know that OPD has just now created an opportunity to do some texting in for suspicious activity, behavior. All of a sudden begin to see that we've got a whole bunch of integration that has to kind of occur under this Orlando.gov sometime in the future.
Yeah, so on the front end, which is how do residents access it, the good news is the integration is by making sure that the navigation puts them in the right spot, right? So that's, I won't say the easy part, but that's the part that we're doing right now and we're wrapping up. On the feedback side, the integration work is a little bit more intense because yes, if we have different systems collecting the residents' data and we want to send them a survey and the survey comes from this system, those two obviously need to connect to each other. And so that's the work that will have to be done in the future. Short term, we're doing, some of it old school, we're exporting it out and sending out surveys. And in terms of how we connect back to what the residents' expectations are, what we do is we work with the department to map out that process. So if they're telling us they're responding, we're going to let residents know to expect to hear a response. If they're telling us they're not responding, we're going to tell residents don't expect a response in a nicer way than that. But we want to make sure that we're setting resident expectations accurately based on what the department tells us they're doing. Then we'll provide them the measurement. So if you can not respond and still have high satisfaction, great, right? But if you're going to have low satisfaction because you're not responding, that department now knows that and they have the information so that they can decide whether they need to adjust their business process.
And the issue that I fall into is that somebody has said they've filed a complaint, a pothole sign, whatever it may be. Nothing's happened on it. I know that we have a high priority in potholes, high priority in signs, all those kind of issues. Nothing's happened. It's been 2, 3, 4 weeks, and so the comment I get now 3 weeks later is, why in the world haven't I done something? As if I should be going out and fixing the tree. Mm-hmm. And so I think there's got to be a connection between I filed it, I acknowledge it, there's a response in time, and then ideally we'd like to confirm, I saw your picture of a pothole complete, ideally we'd like to confirm that it's done. And that way I think that creates that level of trust, so when they ask a second time or a third time, they're going to feel better about asking if we know that we're responding.
Yeah, and again, we know what the ideal scenario looks like, right? We share that with staff, and then we measure, right? And so there's a lot of challenges to getting all 276 services to that point, right? There's personnel challenges, just the manpower to do it. There's technology challenges that we have to make sure the technology is in place so that they can do that. And then the reality is we want to measure and make sure it's worth our while. So part of that trust is what we can go back to and say, is the person who's complaining to Commissioner Stewart a one-off? Right? We missed it. It fell through the cracks, which happens, right? Or is this a systematic problem that division or department needs to look into? And we're going to give them that information.
One last question, and I'll shut up, I promise. Who in the country is doing this the best?
I'd say that we are, humbly, we are leading the way in measuring, in doing both the service design and the measurement side. So there's some cities that have engaged just in measurement, but not in trust measurement. And there are cities like Boston that are hailed as kind of the top level. But if you go to their website today, and there are issues abound because they hired a consultant that can only do 30% of it based on the budget. So I think we're leading the pack. It's why you saw at that presentation we are working with a bunch of other cities, and we don't want to be the only ones. So we're sharing the work that we're doing because part of what we want to know is what's a good satisfaction rating for potholes. Yeah. Right? We don't know, and so what we want to do is understand what other cities are measuring so that we can decide, well, what are they doing that's different that allows them to have a higher satisfaction. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate your work at the Florida League of Cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Matt, Commissioner Stewart just wanted you to say that we were. That's it. So
I try and be humble.
Thank you so much for your work, and thank you. Your team have done a wonderful job, and it shows a great presentation of the Florida League of Cities. I have to leave a little early, but I hear a lot about you, and everybody was expecting you to go and do a presentation. So he gave me great pride to know he was from our city of Orlando. So thank you. I have 4 items I want to talk to you about. The first one is about the data. We're data driven in my office. So, and I notice when people have a complaint or they request X service or whatnot, there's any way that we can some way somehow allow the commissioner get this information accordingly. And I think this goes along with what Commissioner Stewart was talking about. If there's a way as the complainant or the person who calls, who gets into the computer and types, I want this service or whatnot, or this is going on, there's any way that the particular district where that happens gets that information in order for us to also keep tabs on it?
So not right now. So I'll say 2 things. One is, if you looked at our website right now, there are 140 people on our website, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would argue you don't want a notification every time somebody's doing something, right? What we want to make sure we're providing to you and to the mayor and to the staff is where we are seeing those shortfalls and issues and how we're addressing those problems. The other side of that is transparency in general. So we believe, and we are working on a process that anyone can go in and see what issues have been reported, how quickly they're being responded to. We think that transparency is important in all of the departments. We haven't had a single department that has not agreed with that. Again, the challenge there is making sure we've got the technology and everything in place that will allow us to do that.
The reason I ask for this is because we like to follow up, and we want to make sure that our constituents feel comfortable. Just along, as you were saying, satisfaction guarantee, just trying to make sure that they have been served accordingly, and that we have that conversation about whatever the service is. If there's a way that we can go ahead in some way, somehow, as a complaint comes in, identify which district, and that district would get some sort of a notice about whichever the complaint is, that would be very, very helpful.
Yeah, it's something we can definitely look into.
Okay, that's one. These are just little things. The government area, what it shows about the commissioners and the mayor, I think we're utilizing too much space to describe all the commissioners on one page, because later on, once you click, it's going to go to that commissioner's page. So you know what I'm saying? There's a page where all the commissioners and the mayor are there, and there's a little descriptive block or whatnot. Yep. If we can just put, I think, and this is just my opinion, just a picture and a name, and I think when people click, they can go to our pages and they can see the whole thing. So
yeah, we'll take a look at it. And one of the things, again, we do is we test it with the residents and make sure it works for them.
Access. What happening? Okay, access. I have a team in my office that work continuously and at the time when things are happening. I understand we recently asked for some access in order to keep updating our page, which we already have it set, but we're told that from now on, the information is going to be processed through communications. I think that's not good. It's not good for my office. I don't know how the other commissioners feel. But in my office, we update things continually. We're working on it, and we want to go ahead and send that message as it happens. That's the reason why we ended up bringing some more people, because back in the days, communications is very busy with so many things going on, and you guys do a tremendous job. But I think it's one of the convenience of having somebody in the office who is accessing or actually putting this information, and so for the people to have access to it as it happens is much, much better. So this is something that I'm very concerned about.
I think you'll see some information in the next week or so that we're going to make sure that for events and for news and things like that, that there's a process in place that allows you to share that information and do it in a quick way.
Meaning, are we going to have access so we can input the information?
Correct.
Okay.
For events. Post, and we're going to make sure that there is an easy ability for you to add to your page.
Okay, well, we can sit down and talk about the details on that. And the last thing, which has become a national thing, is ADA. It's a big conversation at the Florida League of Cities, at the National League of Cities. I just came back from Washington, and this was an item that we were even taking to Congress, because there's been some complaints about especially people that can see or can hear, and how we have access. And I heard you talking about ADA. Can you expand on this particular subject? What exactly are we doing and how are we addressing this issue?
Sure. We're going to be making sure, so we're going to be doing two things. One, we've extensively been looking at all of our services that we offer and understanding what we believe is the level of ADA acceptability on those, and ensuring that we're continually working on that. We're also making sure that we bring in new services and new vendors that they are ADA accessible. But most importantly, and I think the key piece here is that we provide a way in which we can accommodate any requests that come in. So you'll be seeing a banner on the bottom of our page that will say if they need ADA accommodations, they can let us know. That goes to the Office of Communications, who's going to make sure that we field those requests, right? So what we are required and what we want to make sure we're doing is providing people the acceptable accommodations that they're requesting. And so we're going to make sure we are doing that on this site. I will say furthermore, on our Orlando.gov site, the content itself, we are making sure is ADA accessible, right? And so that is really important to us, that we can do as much as we can. So if someone's using a screen reader or as any other, maybe they have mobility issues and they can't use a mouse, we want to make sure that they can navigate our site and get to the right page and request those accommodations if need be.
Well, once again, thank you, April, and your team and everybody. Thank you for the job you guys are doing. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner and Commissioner Sheehan.
Thanks, Mayor. And something that I find a lot of times when people contact our office is that they'll say they never got a response. It's not that they didn't get a response, they didn't get the response that they wanted. So, you know, you know, they'll say, oh, I've contacted you 6 times. Well, they haven't. And sometimes people tend to overstate their case a little bit. So I think this data helps us show that. And if there's a way I can pull up and say, okay, X person was addressed. So that way when they deal with me, they're yelling at me at a neighborhood meeting, I can say, wait a minute, you know, we did address your situation. It might not have been the answer that you wanted, but we did address your concern. So that would be helpful, because then everybody gets all charged up. And social media too, it's not that the departments haven't been responsive. It's just that we couldn't, or, you know, if someone's got less than 100 cars driving down the street every day, we can't put traffic calming in. It's not that you didn't get the answer, it's that you didn't get the answer that you wanted, kind of thing. And I'm a little concerned about the communications piece too, because sometimes there's not a consistent message in communication, and I don't want to have to go fix things after the fact. I've had to do that in the past, and that's frustrating to me, because my job relies upon, my direct customer services, and that's not always the case for a staff person who can say, well, I just didn't know, and then I'm the one that has to go pick it up. So I don't want to get in a situation where I have to do cleanup. We all have jobs to do, and I'd rather we work together, but I don't want to be taken out of the communications process at all, because I'm very concerned about that. And I'd just like to say that the online trash pickup for large items, I've used it online, it's great. So, very, very responsive, and I was even able to cancel it because someone picked it up. Yep. So that's really cool. And I didn't know people picked up, stuff, from scrap metal and stuff like that, like appliances and all that, but, hey, I was able to cancel it, which is kind of cool too.
I would encourage everyone to I know that we all know who to go to, and I've shared this in there, but use our website, right? And the best way for us to make sure that we're doing it, we tell our staff to do the same, right, is the more that we use it, the more we're going to make sure that everything's operating. So the solid waste team has done a great job making sure
I got a dead tree next, so it's all good. Thanks. Thanks,
all right, Commissioner Hill.
Thank you, Mayor. Great job, Matt, and your team with making it's a 21st century city when it comes to the digital community. There's, with there being a digital divide in my community, I was wondering if there would be a workshop or so, if at least 2, moving forward, so that we can introduce this new Orlando.gov and some of the new apps that's available at some of our HOA meetings, or at least 2 at 2 of our community centers, one that's centrally located possibly in the Parramore area, and then farther west, if that you can consider that.
Yep, we're more than happy working with the communications team to figure out what that outreach looks like as we roll this out. And I'll also say that with the digital divide, we are very conscious of that. And so again, a lot of the testing we're doing, and I'll share what we did. We did some testing with some middle school students in Parramore, who it was fascinating to see that because they're so used to using iPads and iPhones, they actually are not used to using computers. And so we talk about things having to be mobile friendly. They use iPads and iPhones and never really use a computer. And so it really changes what it means to make sure that this is accessible for everyone online. And so we'll continue to do both the testing within all the different neighborhoods and within different areas, and senior citizens, young people, all across the board. But yeah, we're also more than happy to come out and do to share both with the communications team on what they can do on the website and how they can interact with it.
Awesome, thank you. And are we offering this over at the Mayor Summit? Because I know there's all kind of communities that's going to be convening. Is there a workshop regarding this that you did an introduction?
I don't think there's a specific workshop at the Mayor Summit this year. We were there last year. We're doing some testing and working with residents, and I know that we can make sure that the information is shared with.
That'd be a great idea
there,
since we're going to have so many folks.
Yep.
And then last, there is another one with the language. Can we consider also the Creole language? And also I have a large Portuguese community in the Metro West side of Orlando. And I know we have the, as you said, we're gonna do the Hispanic language, but it's a little bit different, as you know. And if we can translate it into Portuguese also.
The Office of Multicultural Affairs and the Office of Communications, I know, are working to look at what languages and the logistics of how, right? Because there are lots of different options on how to get there. But I know that both of those two have been mentioned.
And along with Commissioner Ortiz and Sheehan, everyone knows that I'm a major pig on social media and websites and email blasts. I don't enjoy losing access of my message and putting out my message, even though I work close with communications to make sure that it's one message that's coming from out of my office. But there's times where I'm on site and I need to upload and let my community know and my followers know and constituents know what I'm doing in the right now. I don't mind you having access to my site, but policing it and putting out your message that the city wants might be a little bit different than mine. And I would love to have that access back, like ASAP.
Natalie, share a little bit more.
Commissioner, so one of the things we've noticed with all the commissioner pages currently on cityoforlando.net, that the most updated information is events and news. Everything else tends to be pretty static, or if it's changed, then we work very quickly with your aides to update that information. Well, we wanted to give the aides access to be able to update the events and and their news. I've worked with everyone's aides here, and one of the wonderful things about this site is that we're creating consistency throughout. So people, when they go to the page, they will know that they'll see services that are most important to them in that district always will be on the top right side. They know when they first look at the page, they'll have the contact information will always be at the top. They know that there will be a panel that will have all the events. They know that there will be a panel for all the different infrastructure projects that are automatically populated by the Public Works Department, so that your aides aren't struggling to find the current, most up-to-date information, or even my department. So in that respect, a lot of it is automated already from other parts of the website. So the events get populated onto the full calendar for this for Orlando.gov. So if your aides go in and put in one of your meetings, everyone will automatically see it. It won't just be to your page.
Well, I do more than events.
No, I know.
Okay.
It was just an example.
It's initiatives that I would like to have access to my website and my page. It's just that simple, because sending it to you might take a few days. And for me, my constituents follow my pages, and that's where they get their information. It's not just it's a city page, and I know you have ownership of that page, but I, as elected, not as a department manager, need access to my page. And that has been a problem in the office when I'm asking them to put, say, well, no, we can't anymore. We have to go through communications. And that, when I'm in the right now thinking in my creative space, I need to have it right there and have them put it in, because usually they're gonna answer the phone and things are gonna get lost. And then guess who it falls on? It falls on my staffer, and they get the brunt of, why haven't you done this right now? And
Okay, I'm not conversant enough to weigh in on this, so why don't each of the individual commissioners set up a meeting with communications and get your needs met in whatever way they need to be met?
Yeah. I mean, I understand there's, Mayor, there's need for consistency and stuff, but like I set up my own commissioner page. You all wanted, access to it and everything like that, but it's not like anybody helped me.
Sure.
So it's kind of frustrating that I created it and I got the followers and stuff, and now y'all want to kind of, control it kind of thing. So, and I want to be able to, if I'm at the Asian Lunar New Year, I want to be able to post them at the Asian Lunar New Year. I don't want to have to go through because social media is immediate. I don't want to have to wait 2 or 3 days later to be able to post them.
So your social media accounts or your social media
Okay, cool.
accounts? That's,
All right,
yeah, we're only strictly talking about the website.
So the website, okay.
So we'll make sure we follow up individually, and I'll just to think about between now and the time that we follow up, a couple things that we know. One, going back to our ADA accessibility. So there are a lot of rules that we have in place about the content we're posting that we want to make sure it remains accessible for everyone. From a translation standpoint, we want to make sure that content is being translated in a timely fashion. So there are reasons behind why we're trying to do this with a process in there. And so the communications team, I know, has been working with the aides a lot to figure out what that process looks like. And I know that we can come up with a process that will meet your needs and still make sure that we provide an accessible website. And we'll work to do that.
And so transportation does something that may be helpful. We might not have to look for best practices. It might just be in-house to where our constituents' complaints that's transportation related, they compile that information and update us, I think, at least once a month. And it does come from call-ins from different, whether it's speed bumps or whatever, sidewalks, and maybe you might can
and
work with
again,
transportation
our
on how
goal is
they
to provide
compile
that
it.
information to the departments, and we want them sharing. We want them sharing that with you, and so that's what we're doing. Is we're trying to empower them with both the data and the information they need, so that they can share it with you and with the residents.
All right, thanks, Matt. Great job.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes our public workshop for today. Okay, let's go into our agenda review meeting. And is there anyone from the public that would like to speak on any of the consent